For centuries, we believed money was a tool for trade. It was meant to make life easier, a simple way to exchange value. But history reveals a colder, darker function. Look closely at the financial statements of an empire. The true purpose of the monetary system becomes chillingly clear. It is not a tool for growth, it is a mechanism of control. It is a structure built to methodically extract real wealth, not gold or diamonds, but the actual labor of a people. It must constantly feed itself to avoid collapse. That is the hidden irony of stability. A system that depends on taking something of real value and replacing it with debt, paper, and promises. What if the cost of order is the eternal theft of labor? To understand this, we must look at the docks of Calcutta in 1890. Every train from the interior brought raw materials to the port. Cotton, jute, tea, and grains were loaded onto massive ships. This was the real physical wealth of India, sailing away. On the streets of London, the money for these goods was moved. But the Indian producer was rarely paid in actual value. They were paid in local currency, backed by paper promises. Or often, they were forced to buy British goods and pay taxes. Imagine the value of an entire nation's production, transferred across oceans without a corresponding return flow. The physical economy of India was slowly, methodically hollowed out. Meanwhile, the financial district in London grew opulent and immense. The banking towers of the West were literally built on these missing funds. This was not trade. It was a sophisticated financial drain. A constant, invisible current pulling the stream of real cash. How did they achieve this kind of non-stop structural extraction? It was done through a simple, ingenious system of paper and debt. The British Raj would issue bonds and bills in London. These were debts supposedly incurred for the benefit of India. But the funds were actually used to pay for British military expeditions, or to pay salaries and pensions for English officials back home. These bonds were immediately snapped up by London's financial elite. They were seen as the safest assets on the planet, backed by the taxing power and immense resources of India itself. So, where did the interest payments for these Indian debts come from? They came from the revenue generated by Indian taxes and labor. The Indian farmer was paying interest to the British investor. Interest on a debt that was never spent on his village or his future. This became known as the home charges. It was a giant, continuous annual payment from India to Britain. It was profit disguised as an administrative cost. A steady, unavoidable transfer of wealth secured by the entire legal system. The monetary system did not create value in India. It acted as a high-pressure pump, channeling value out. The rupee was kept pegged to the pound sterling at a forced rate. This artificial link made Indian exports incredibly cheap for Britain, but it made British imports extremely expensive for Indians. It was a rigged exchange rate, a tool of trade control. The British factory owner could sell their cheap goods back to India. They faced minimal competition because of these forced currency laws. The true function of the currency was not a medium of exchange. It was a financial wire to maintain the flow of real goods outward. And this constant structural theft fueled London's stability. It maintained the gold reserves of the Bank of England. It paid for the global navy that protected the trade routes. The stability of one monetary center required the financial instability of another. The greatest irony is that the system created its own internal paradox. The empire required India to be wealthy enough to pay the taxes, but it had to keep India poor enough to prevent any competition. This is the central contradiction that eventually tears all empires apart. When India ran massive trade surpluses with the rest of the world, the profits were not kept in India to build industry or railways. The profits were forcibly diverted to pay for Britain's trade deficits. India's surplus with the world became London's private reserve. This structural imbalance was not a bug, it was the entire feature. It was the design that kept the money flowing the right way. Any cash flow that threatened to empower the local economy was immediately diverted. If a local bank grew too powerful, it was quickly absorbed or crushed. The entire apparatus of law and money was fixed against local growth. The Indian population was trapped in an invisible financial cage. They were forced to produce and then taxed to pay their own owners. This is the hidden cost of sound money and a stable currency. It is a currency that is stable for the extractor, not the producer. The immense burden of this debt was placed on the future. Future generations of Indians would work just to cover the interest payments. Interest on expenses that benefited only a few thousand people in a distant city. The very concept of a national debt was weaponized. It became a perpetual tax on the labor of the unborn. The British financial system had perfected the art of time travel. It took resources from the future and spent them today in London. And the victims of this time travel theft are now working to pay for it. Every day you pay a tax, a rent, or an inflated price, you are paying for a debt created a century ago on the other side of the world. The colonial empire is gone, but the fundamental mechanics remain. Look at the modern global financial system today. The debt is now called sovereign bonds or complex derivatives. The extraction mechanism is now called quantitative easing or bailouts. The actors have changed, but the script is almost identical. Central banks create massive amounts of new money digitally. This new money flows first to the financial elite, not the factory floor. It bids up the price of housing, stocks, and essential assets. The producer of real goods gets the inflation, the financer gets the assets. The hidden cost is still the methodical devaluing of your labor. This is the core paradox of all stable financial systems. They must always create instability and extraction somewhere else. They must always find a new producer to take value from. Look at the lights of the financial towers tonight. They are still bright. The servers are still running. The accounts are still balancing, but the debt keeps growing. We are still living in the shadow of that two-sided ledger. The cost of a stable present is a future burdened by invisible debt. And the system will not stop until we choose to look at the books, until we understand what is being extracted and by whom.